Well, Murray and Roberts' German shareholder Aton didn't get its way at the company's recent shareholders meeting. At least 52.6% of the shareholders want to see the proposed merger between the construction company and engineering firm going ahead. But is the battle over, though? This is Murray and Roberts and Aveng, and we've got Basil Reid suspended from trade. These are guys that built the World Cup stadiums, and they've gone off a cliff in a very spectacular fashion. If we think that the collapse of Steinhoff and the fights of Steinhoff Africa Retail are bad, these are battles for life and death of companies that are 50 and 60 years old.
Yeah, I mean, it's very sad. If you go back to 2010, when there was just so much optimism around the construction sector, and you come back, fast forward 8 years later, it's all a mess. And I think what Murray perhaps is trying to do is to try and do a bit of consolidation with Aveng. I think Aveng needs this particular transaction to go through a lot more than Murray's, because without the Murray's offer, then the future looks very bleak for them. They've got a massive debt due, to be paid next year, and if that doesn't go through, certainly it will render them, in a lot of trouble. So. It's a very, very sad story, but I think one that can turn around depending on how the fortunes of South Africa, it all goes back to the South African economy.
If you live in the bubble that is the northern suburbs of Johannesburg, there's hardly a road that's not being tarred or a crane that's not either knocking down a building or building another building. Oxford Road that runs from Sandton all the way through Rosebank, that node is doing incredibly well. You would think the economy was growing at 5%.
No, certainly. I mean,
and sadly, it's only happening in a small space.
It's a small space where it's really happening. It should be happening across the whole country. There should be implementation of the NDP, industrializing major parts of the country which are still underdeveloped. But that particular development is only happening in a very, very small scale.
Yeah. Paul, I mean, does it feel like a negative cycle to you that we're sort of nearing the bottom of, or
Again,
are you frightened of calling cycles?
Comes back to that conversation we had earlier. I just think what we need in this country is a sense of stability. So when the 2019 election happens, it'll be interesting to see how the minority parties do, how the ANC does. I've got a feeling that what the President Cyril Ramaphosa is doing now is he's kind of trying to keep his bus together without anyone falling out or one of the wheels coming off, just until he can deliver the electoral mandate.
Doesn't get impounded by the JMPD on the M1 motorway,
to extend the METFA. And then I think things will improve. I think then people will start to make a call, because you've got a guy at the helm who's going to serve 2 terms, presumably, and that'll bring some operational stability, maybe some more pro-business news. All that marketing to try and attract inward investment, maybe some stabilizing of the currency, blah, blah, blah. I don't know. I'm intrinsically optimistic, and I think the investment strike, if there's such a thing, will wane. People will start making calls on capacity expansion, and I think consumers will get a bit more positive. I think we just have to grit it out.
We need some more investment in South Africa. We need South Africans to invest in South Africa. The Naspers results were so interesting from the perspective that, and the number that stood out to me was that 84% of their business now is outside of South Africa. All of the printing presses and the newspapers and the websites and the take-a-lots and all of those things, all of that stuff, it's huge in South Africa. 84% of it happens outside the country. And more companies, sadly, talk about the investment strike, that's been their strategy, to externalize.
It's true. I mean, if you just take the JSE, and I spoke earlier about the fact that we've been quite resilient. And unfortunately, that resilience, it's not the true reflection of South African economy, because, as you said, most of that contribution comes from outside. If you take out the contribution of Naspers and many other companies, then you are left with absolutely a disaster. And that's the story of South Africa that's been happening in the past. But I think going forward, I agree with Paul. If we get all the things right, and perhaps going forward, we could actually steer this car in the right direction.
Here's the question to you. Your clients, who are people who live in the real world, who run real world businesses, who are struggling every day to keep the wolf away from the door, yet you still expect them to give you some money from time to time so you can invest on their behalf for the long term. They're not necessarily feeling that same sort of sense of optimism, because South Africa's real world is tough and markets are quite flighty.
Yeah. That's what happens. People want to add to their investment portfolios when the going is good and the gains have been there. So we have seen quite a lot of inflows into US-based and foreign portfolios, because, as you know, those markets have been doing well. But I've counseled people on a repeated basis just to be calm, to be patient, and to stay invested at the very least. I could forgive people for not throwing millions at the market right now. But I think it always makes sense to be accumulating, and they don't ring a bell at the bottom.
No.
So if, as you say, stocks that you know are low, and there are companies that are well run, like Discovery, for example, it's really just what has happened is the sentiment is depressed and the price to earnings ratio is compacted. The earnings will be there, and all of the exciting things they're still working on.
Yeah, I mean, and this is the question is, to stay invested, to add investments in a falling market. What's the old-fashioned saying, never catch a falling knife, or don't try and catch a falling piano? Are we in that scenario?
Well, there are lots of those kind of market aphorisms. The other one is that you should buy when there's, thunder in the sky, blood on the streets.
But there's no blood on the streets. I looked earlier, and I didn't see any blood on the streets. And the question is, have we seen the worst of it? And it doesn't feel like we have. The sentiment is still.
Yeah. No, look, I think if you were to look overall, have we seen the worst of it? I think we're not there yet. We just haven't seen the pullback. Even though if you were to break it down in certain sectors, we certainly have companies that are down in the region of 20%, just 30%. So I think in certain sectors, perhaps we're nearing the bottom. But in certain sectors, I think there could still be more pressure to come. And just overall, the market just doesn't feel like we've really sold off enough, for a person to come back and start buying quite aggressively.
The Duracell bunny of optimism, however, Paul Theron.
Yeah. Now, I like the outlook, particularly for Naspers, which you mentioned earlier. Yeah. I like those results.
Although the technical analysts are saying it's going to go to 2,200 Rand because it's developed a knee and toe or a head and shoulders or some kind of pattern.
But you must never listen to those people. I mean, they're very unreliable. The fact is, the company operational numbers, I like what they're doing, focusing on food delivery and on, classifieds and OLX and all of that stuff. The 10-cent thing is as strong as ever. They've got all this cash on the balance sheet, and I think the screws are tightening on the management team to close that discount to the implied value, some of the parts things. You can tell they're saying, look, the situation's in hand. But the fact that their investment presentations deal with it now very centrally tells you that they are working night times, overtime, thinking about what can be done. That's a great value opportunity that investors can capture if they're invested in the market, in that stock in particular.
Gentlemen, thank you very much indeed. Lovely to have you both here. That is where we leave it for this week. A nice wrap-up of the month of June. It's been a tough month. It's been a month in which we've seen stock markets pull back very, very sharply. The currency also has been very vulnerable. But there is a sense of optimism. Yes, it may get a little bit darker before the dawn, but still. Paul Theron and Maudi Lenstoane, thank you very much for coming through for us this evening. Send us your feedback via Twitter. The handle for that is @ENCA or directly to me @BruceBusiness using the hashtag ENCA Taking Stock. That is it for Taking Stock for this evening. Thank you very much for watching. Till next time. Bye-bye.